Hello and welcome to Serious Insights for Admins. I'm your host, Kristi Campbell, and I am joined today by Jack Lavis, the Salesforce business analyst at Elements.cloud. Hi, Jack.
Hey, Kristi. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, we are going to dive into flow today. And obviously, there's a lot of talk around flow going in the admin community. Well, really in the whole Salesforce world, I think, ever since they told us that our other options were going, our little whoobies were going away eventually. And so I wanted to bring Jack in to really dig into with someone who's started this process, right? I think a lot of conceptual things we've talked about. Salesforce has released, an automated tool for starting to move. And so, Jack, tell me a little bit about what you do at Elements and kind of how this project kicked off for you.
Yeah, cool. So as you've already mentioned, I'm the Salesforce business analyst. I kind of fell into the Salesforce ecosystem, 4 years ago now. Initially joined Elements as a business excellence manager from a previous BA insurance broker. Long story, but I was kind of shoved in front of Salesforce and said, "Have a go at that. Here's 6 weeks of Trailhead, and then we'll start, looking at building things." And so that was my journey into Salesforce. So it was an accidental admin, if you like. But with the previous BA background, I manage, in terms of Elements itself, the change intelligence platform. So it's a one central place for requirements, user stories, do a bit of process mapping, impact analysis. So it's taking a requirement from a stakeholder in the business, doing the prior analysis, and then bringing that into our Salesforce org. So that's my daily routine at the moment, I'd say.
Okay. And what got you starting to look at your automations and flows and workflows and process builders and all the things?
So it was like most people probably listening to this, it was so we're going to be retiring process builder and workflow. It was like, okay, so where do we go with this? And it was a conversation with our CTO. And we sat down for a good couple of hours and we kind of planned out how we want to do it and using Elements to do that. But it was very much the prompt from Salesforce of, this is going to happen. So we kind of thought, well, let's get ahead of the curve and see how we can do this.
Well, yeah, that's actually a really great point. I just assume people know what Elements is because I know and love it and use it. But maybe telling us a little bit about, obviously it sounds like you drink your own champagne, like with using Elements to manage the Elements business. So you want to talk a little bit about Catalyst and what Elements, where that kind of fits in for Salesforce users?
Yeah, by all means. So Salesforce we call ourselves a change intelligence platform. Basically what Elements does is you probably already do all of this in a spreadsheet or in a bunch of apps. Elements puts everything into one place, so it's easier, faster, and your documentation it's more valuable. But it allows you to have a central place for creating requirements, creating user stories, documenting your metadata against those user stories. So daily we run syncs of your Salesforce org. We get all the metadata out, and you can then document changes, adoption metrics, training against particular metadata, and you can then show that inside your Salesforce org for your end users. The really powerful thing that Elements does, and it ties back to my role as a BA, is the org metadata impact analysis and then that documentation. So prior to any change, you do your analysis first. You can do your impact analysis, i.e., where is this field being used? Mm-hmm. Is it being used in a flow? Is it being used in record types? Is it being used in particular PIP lists? You do that analysis first. So then when you come to make that change, you're not going to break anything in your org. So using Elements as part of this process builder to flow migration has been pretty valuable, I'd say.
Yeah, it's definitely what I like is, and this is, not a paid commercial, right? But, being able to see that impact, including how often the field is populated, which page layouts it's used on, if a field is used on reports and it's not the right field, like it's an old field and it's still being used on reports. So Even if you don't get into the full user story tracking and requirement gathering and like the full breadth of all the things it can do, there's definitely that admin side panel on being able to evaluate, flag fields as you're going through and evaluating them. I'm working on an org merge right now and looking at, if I've evaluated fields and kind of tracking those connections. So future me, a month from now, me even can remember, and I don't have to refigure things out. So it definitely has been helpful for me to see if there's fields that are being used in flows as I, got started in this job and got more familiar with.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's looking after the future you. Because every admin's guilty of thinking, okay, so how am I going to do this now? I'm guilty of this. I don't tend to think, okay, so how is this going to help somebody in 6 months' time? But you've hit the nail on the head by looking after the future, by documenting it and flagging things. It's super helpful. So
yeah. So okay, so your first step was really to kind of sit down and evaluate this whole ball of wax, right? And it's a lot, right? Especially if you've got a more mature org. You're not talking about just the account and contact objects, right? But those probably do have a lot more automation against them or integrated systems connecting to them, right? So how did you kind of start evaluating where to start?
So I think we almost took a step back, and we I think the migration, I call it a migration. You're actually, in theory, when you're stepping back, actually thinking about it, you're refactoring and you're moving to flow. You're not just migrating. There's a bunch of work that falls under this umbrella of migration. It could be, we saw it as an opportunity rather than, okay, it's a pain because you have to do the work, but it's an opportunistic pain, if you like. So it's an opportunity for us to clean up tech debt. That's one of the first things we thought about. It's an opportunity to simplify our current processes, automations, to rethink them. Can we even combine them? Like we mentioned before, using Subflow. So I think the first thing we did was we actually took a step back from the overall problem and thought, okay, so what is the piece of work we actually need to do here? Once we then understood, okay, so we've got these 45 process builders, for example. We need to start refactoring them and moving these to flow. We then started to build a business case. So, for example, you don't need to move everything at once because it's a real challenge to build everything at once. It takes time. Testing everything can be really tough because a flow can call a flow, or a field could be you could have a record triggered flow, for example, that's being called by a particular field, but you may have multiple flows called by one field. So it becomes a bit of a mess around what are we actually testing here. So it was thinking, okay, prioritize what's important to us as a business that we can move to flow. It's the low hanging fruit, if you like, rather than doing a big bang and going, let's put all this in. It's going to be brilliant. It's going to work. The problem is if you put everything in flow, when you start getting errors, it's really hard to manage triggers through those flows.
Right.
So building a business case, and then suddenly you get to, okay, so we've done the analysis. We then need to design, build, test, and then release. So the first thing we did was we sat down under the umbrella, what's important to us, prioritize, and then start to actually analyze the changes we want to make, I guess.
And then you mentioned design too. So I saw a really great video recently on Salesforce Flowsome about planning and designing your flows, which I think is really helpful for people to start the transition to how flow works, right? Is really nailing down. And honestly, again, just not as an ad, right? But that elements can really be helpful. The process map piece can really be helpful from that perspective, right? Because it's a lot of if this, then that kind of logic. And so I think it's important to plan out what you want your flow to do before you even open the flow canvas, right? So
Yeah.
thinking about and aggregating those kind of key fields that you've identified that workflow is doing something to, I think you made a great point about making sure that those things still serve you and are a
Yep.
priority, right? You may have something updating a field that no one even realizes is being populated, or the process, it's based on some other field that doesn't get populated anymore. So it's not consistent, right? And making sure you understand why you're doing the things that you're doing.
Yeah.
Maybe you've got a whole new head of sales that
Yeah.
calculates, MQL, PQL kind of stuff differently, and they don't even
Yeah.
realize that there's something going right. So I do think it's definitely a great opportunity to first take a step and make sure that your automations are serving you, that they function how you think they're supposed to function.
Yeah.
And then starting to design, and you mentioned subflows, and part of the reason that I wanted to make sure we touched on that is because um, I think I get stuck in a lot of analysis paralysis. I want to learn, I want to do it right the first time, right? Like I
Mhm.
want to see what other people are doing, ask questions, and a lot of that kind of translates with subflows. Should I use subflows, right? What's the pattern I should use? um,
Yeah.
and I think one takeaway for me is to remember, right, that you can iterate, right? So maybe in your initial design, maybe you design a flow, and then later, before you even start building it, you realize that your other flow you're going to design would use the same thing, right? So um, but
Exactly
if
that.
you had already built it, you can also refactor it again,
Yeah.
right? So
Exactly.
we're trying to get to progress, not perfection, I guess. I don't know
Yeah.
if in that kind of design and approach phase, if you have any examples of things that you identified that were specifically interesting or kind of surprising.
Yeah, I think it comes back to to simplifying what you've already got. So part of our analysis and design, so we had a process builder that was calling the same flow. I think it was 5 or 6 times. Obviously, had different criteria to hit the
Mm-hmm.
same flow, which was part of our CPQ package. And during the design, I remember sitting there thinking, why did we ever build this like this? Because at the time it made sense.
Mm-hmm.
We myself, I built the process builder. I wasn't as up to speed with flow, if that's the right way to say it, as
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be. Process builder was the easier option at the time. Again, it on the eye, it just felt a little bit more comfortable actually going through the blocks. So you define the criteria, the process builder, and you call the flow. And then suddenly flow opened my eyes to, okay, so you can actually call subflows from flows. You can create platform events, for example. So we're starting to bring in third-party integrations. And this all happens as part of the design phase, right? So it's understanding what you want your flow to do before you jump in and build it. Because if you jump in and build it, you're going to spend all this time, wasted time, if you like, effectively refactoring it, testing it. So do your analysis up front, design the flow how you want your flow to be working,
Mm-hmm.
understand that you can use subflows, you can use platform events to call integrations. But first things first is don't be afraid of it. It's programming, but it's really, really simple. I say that for a bit of experience, obviously, but just don't be afraid of it. Jump in, have a go, do your analysis up front first. I can't stress that enough. Do your design, and then suddenly it will just all come to you. But the use of subflows saves a lot of time in terms of you don't have to create multiple flows over and over again if you've got the same thing calling the same subflow.
Right.
Makes it
Did
a
you
lot easier.
find so once you had kind of done your overall plan, did you
Mhm.
find that you kind of tackled simpler flows or smaller object, like less touched objects first?
I'd say we probably prioritized our key objects. So opportunity, account, contact, and then probably 3 or 4 custom objects that we use as part of our CPQ packages for our account managers and things.
Mhm.
So we prioritize the objects, but we definitely tackled the low hanging fruit first. It's the simpler migration. We kind of sat down and thought, okay, let's get these out. We know exactly how to build them. We didn't skip the design phase, but it was essentially a two block flow from a process builder.
Gotcha.
You don't over design, don't overcomplicate it. So we definitely hit the low hanging fruit first, and then when we got to the more complex stuff, like creating platform events to then call webhooks and integrations, we sat down and did a thorough design. But yeah, we definitely tackled the easier stuff first, I'd say.
I think that's a great way to kind of get started and see, what flow can do. Sometimes in the design, it's like, oh, we'll just have our entry criteria be ABC. And then you kind of go start to do it and realize you can't do that. So,
Yeah.
maybe you need a decision instead. And kind
Mhm.
of just getting comfortable. I think you made a great point that, um, you know, don't don't have any guilt about past you and the things you find that maybe don't make sense now, but probably made sense at the time, right? Whether it's because of the time you had on the project, the knowledge you had at the time, right? The resources you had available. Um, if you got it to work, it's not
No,
wrong, right? It's
it got you
just
this. It got you this far, didn't it? So
for a while we thought process builder was the way and the truth and the light too, right? And
yeah,
there with its certain eccentricities. And so I think for various reasons flow has become the way, but also you've got people like me with way old PTSD of old flow, right? Like, and so it just seeing the investment of making it so much more straightforward and practical for admins. I definitely agree, not being afraid. It can feel like a lot, especially as more and more features are added.
yeah.
I saw a great quote from, I'm probably going to say his name wrong, but from Andy Utkan, who said, if your first flow is not embarrassing in retrospect, you waited too long to hit the flow canvas. Right.
There we go.
So,
Right.
And that's why we test. Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, do you also use elements to kind of track the QA process out of curiosity?
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm not a tester. Um, in testing, I try to get to the result I want to get to. That's complete conscious bias, right? Like I said, I'm not a tester. I don't test how to break it, which is probably how you should test. In terms of actually documenting testing, yeah, we do use data tables and elements sometimes. During the initial design, so when we're designing our flow, we will come up with test cases. So we understand, again, exactly what we're building and how we want our flow to work. We'll start defining test cases at the design stage.
Mm-hmm.
So when we get to testing, if we've built the flow correctly and we followed our documentation, we should be able to test fairly easily. Obviously, things come up during testing and you get bugs, etc., and the whole process goes round the same circle.
Right.
Yeah, to answer the question, we do use elements. Testing isn't my forte. I know how to. If I know how my flow is working, I have the bias of testing it how it probably shouldn't be tested.
It works the way I want it
But
to, so that's all that I need to
yeah,
test, right? And it works
yeah,
in
but
the debugger, so I mean that means it should be fine.
yeah, I mean, testing is really tough.
Sure.
Testing is really tough, and I have a lot of gratitude to testers out there because it's really tough testing. We have minimum standards we have to hit before we deploy.
Mm-hmm.
I like to joke around saying I'm not a tester, I just hit debug, hope it works. It's really not like that. We do have minimum standards that we have to hit before we deploy.
Right.
But testing flow can be really difficult because you've got the subflows. You need to understand almost the trigger path through. So, okay, so this triggers this, and then this triggers this, and then this triggers this, for example. So we have, we built our own commission app inside our org, and
Okay.
the trigger path is essentially calling 8 flows as part of one trigger. So when you're testing, you need to understand, okay, so at this point, this is what's going to trigger this. If you don't understand your path through your triggers, you're never going to get your testing right. And then when you come to production, it's not going to work on face value.
Right. And have you been
yeah,
using the new Flow Explorer. Is that the
I
right word?
have, that's really, really helpful. And I actually took it to our product manager because it's something I've wanted for a long time inside Elements, and said, "Look what Salesforce have done." And he went, "Damn, that's cool."
That's funny.
Yeah,
I like it.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
hey, enticed with the carrot.
yeah.
Um, so you got your flows built. You mentioned kind of prioritizing key objects, I'm assuming in kind of like chunked releases, right?
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
are you using, just out of curiosity, right? Are you change setting things? Are you using, kind of putting them in a DevOps cycle that then you're moving to production? Like, what does the move to production look like?
So move production for us is change sets. Um, I won't comment too much on change sets.
And so
It,
then you've got a defined process of, because of that documentation, what you're replacing, so you can go and turn off the other automation.
exactly that. It's a circular process. So I didn't do a big bang release. So I moved, I think it was 5 or 6 at a time as part of maybe five or six releases, purely because if something did go wrong, I wanted to know where it went wrong rather than having a complete big bang and then it all falling apart. But yeah, it was for use to change sets. So we deploy it into production. I had a really simple checklist in a spreadsheet. I didn't use Elements for this, purely in a spreadsheet that I made myself. It was okay. So this one's been deployed to production as part of this change set. I've turned off the process builder or workflow that it's now replacing, and I've turned on the flow that's replacing the workflow or process builder. Really simple checklist. And I did that for every single one through, just to make sure nothing was missed. Yeah, so that was my process in terms of release.
And then
Um,
you again start the process all over again for the next
you got it.
object or
You got it.
process.
Yeah, but the whole way through the process, I was really conscious around tech debt was the big thing. So actually cleaning up the process builders that we turned off, deleting them. You don't need them anymore. We're not using them. I didn't do this straight away.
Feels so
Yeah, I didn't. I
scary.
didn't. I didn't do it straight away. I let it probably bed in for, I'd say, I think it was 3 or 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
And then me and my admin decided, okay, so we're comfortable with this. It's being used. Let's delete the process builder, which is a challenge in itself because it has all the dependencies and things before you can delete in Salesforce. But it's cleaning up the tech debt afterwards. It's not leaving it there because it's so easy just to leave it there. It's cleaning up after yourself. Yeah, so that was fun.
Whew, that, like, just literally just talking about it makes me sort of nervous.